Will Ashton, don't you think you should have the podcast you deserve? You've been telling me for a long time. You've been saying
maybe
this is the biggest review of the year.
Is that what?
No other movie you've wanted to review more than this one.
I mean, I've certainly been intrigued to review it, if that's what you're implying.
There was a scenario where you may have missed this recording, and it was all you could do not to spit in my face.
Oh man, yeah, we almost for a movie which we haven't revealed the title of yet, called a certain thing. There was a lot of fretting.
Hocus Pocus 2.
Yeah, there's a lot of fretting about getting this recording done because you were out of town for the weekend. I was out of town yesterday. You were at a wedding.
You're just going to like
family.
Comedy shows every couple minutes.
Sure.
Just living that cosmopolitan lifestyle you're famous for.
But yeah, and then you have a busy week, I guess, ahead. So it was just like we had one day and one designation of time to do this. And we were going to have a guest that unfortunately didn't work out. I hope she can come on for a later episode. But yeah, we had some trouble getting this, and I would have been very, very bummed if I didn't have a chance.
Yeah, you better
share my
you better
thoughts.
Believe, I threw you under the bus completely.
Sure, I imagine you did.
I did not hold back. But yeah, no, not Hocus Pocus 2. Don't worry, darling. One of the strangest movies to talk about in 2022, I think. We'll have to say.
Did Hocus Pocus 2 actually come out this weekend?
No, it's coming up this next weekend.
Okay.
Which, because, at the end of the show, we're going to talk about what we're talking about next week, and I'm just like, what?
Sure.
What don't we talk about? So many movies.
There's so much coming out, not only in terms of theatrical releases, but streaming, that I genuinely have trouble remembering what's coming out when, because like this past weekend, the Jasmine's Blues, the Tyler Perry movie where he, like his passion project, it came out on Netflix. I was trying to keep an eye on it. It's been on Netflix for 3 days. I didn't even know.
Right. And there's too much coming out because between what's hitting streaming and then there's what's hitting theaters and then there's what's hitting on demand. Then there's what's like on the TV side.
Sure.
There's too much.
Fall TV season.
Lots of TV stuff.
Sure.
Andor just hit, and that's been one of the more conversation topics. And Will, of course, begged for us to cover it on Cinemaholics. I told him, no, Will, we've been covering TV shows too often, and he got a little upset. But
that must be the hit show among the dweebs and the nerds and the geeks.
There was a new Jeepers Creepers that came out. Did you hear about this one?
Oh yeah, isn't it like Jeepers Creepers Reborn?
Yeah, that's it. I had no idea who. I was looking at the cast. I was looking at the director. And it's like, I don't know these people. I don't know their story. But it's just a new Jeepers Creepers. It's here. It was I think in theaters. I want to say, or for a special event thing. There was the remake of Goodnight Mommy, which I'm not going to watch. The original's unassailable, and I heard the remake does nothing to advance the agenda of the original. So if you want to watch Goodnight Mommy and you're on Amazon and you're like, well, this one's America, don't. I love you, Naomi Watts, but the original is the one. Confess Fletch, Moon Age Daydream. I mean, these are semi big movies, aren't they?
Sure.
And we just haven't gotten to them, and I feel bad. Revenge on Netflix.
Yeah,
watching that.
There's Pearl also. There is See How They Run.
Yeah,
came out.
That's the Searchlight one. And I know like a new Saoirse Ronan, Sam Rockwell picture, and people are just like, there's too much to get to, too much to watch.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was gonna say, I know we got a movie to actually talk about, but
sure.
Blonde, we just haven't had a chance to see Blonde, and I
want to.
I assume we're gonna cover it. I mean, how could we not? Considering the hoopla, but
sure,
a lot on our plate. That's fine.
I mean, I don't even know how I made time for Clerks 3 last week.
That's right. But okay, so don't worry, darling. And also, this is Cinemaholics, Major Motion Podcast, where we talk about the biggest and the best films going to theaters and streaming online. I'm John Gurney from the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm the film editor for TheYoungFolks.com and from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He's a news and entertainment writer at Collider. It is William Ashton.
Hey, I'm going to let you take a breath or grab a drink of water after all that.
Thank you. And we're talking about Don't Worry, Darling, the latest film from Olivia Wilde, her second film as director.
Yeah.
Right?
And producer, right?
Producer, and with her collaborator and screenwriter partner, Katie Silverman. They did Booksmart together. Booksmart came out in 2019, which I was a big fan of. I really liked Booksmart, saw it multiple times.
Really?
And I thought, you know what, Olivia Wilde, multiple times, yeah.
Oh.
Because I remember seeing it at, I think I saw it at some kind of like screening thing, and then I watched it again with a friend, I want to say, and then I think I watched it one more time, like on some rental, I want to say.
Because I was trying to rewatch it before I saw Don't Worry, Darling, and that has to be, and I still like the movie fine, but that has to be like the most 2019 movie ever made.
You think so? I mean, I remember the first scene being a little bit like, okay, yeah, we're definitely in a certain era with Beanie Feldstein's scene there.
Right. It's a movie that is going to reflect a certain time period. I don't say that disparagingly so much as just as a matter of fact, there's 80 movies that reflect the 80s, and there's going to be a movie that reflects 2019. That was Booksmart.
Yeah. Yeah, like the last like pre-COVID teen raunchy comedy, I guess.
I'm not even talking from a COVID standpoint. I'm just like, that was just like a period of time, politically, socially, economically, that things were coming out. It is, I don't know. I mean, I think you liked it a little bit more than I did, but
definitely. I'm a big fan.
I thought it was a fine debut. I thought it showcased promise for Olivia Wilde as a filmmaker, a fledgling filmmaker, and I was curious to see what she did with her follow-up film.
Same here. Now, this comes to us from Carrie and Shane Van Dyke, who did the original story. Their spec script had a bidding war actually in 2019. So ultimately, Wilde and Silverman were able to pick it up and make this movie. And I look at that situation and I think, what could have been? Like, can you, I think this spec script, I think this idea is something that is a little bit of a diamond in the rough. Easy thing to get wrong, and we'll talk about why. And we also won't give anything away, though I think we do have to have some conversation toward the end here, because this is just one of those movies, right? Like we gotta dig in. We can't just be coy forever. But I honestly think I'll start with this. This is a little bit more than they could chew, wasn't it? Like they bit off a little bit more with this, you think?
Yeah. I mean, I will say, there's a term often used in Hollywood called sophomore slump. And this is a pretty notable and controversial example of a sophomore slump.
But you know what this actually feels like to me more? This feels more like a debut film to me than Booksmart does. Because with Booksmart, you know what? That movie had confidence and focus. I thought that every time I watched it, I just had an idea of like what kind of movies Wilde wants to make. And I got a really good sense of Silverman as a screenwriter. With this movie, this feels like that kind of debut movie that usually gets on my bad side, which is it's just doing it's trying a lot and not really accomplishing much. It feels like a move by a director who feels like they only have one shot. And maybe that's what this is too. Maybe Wilde is feeling a little bit like, I'm not going to have infinite chances. And she's probably right in this kind of industry. But this feels like a little bit of like, I gotta put everything I can in here, and then in the end, I don't know really what we're left with. I gotta describe this thing though, huh? But I'll let you react.
I was gonna say, like, on paper, as far as like the general synopsis of it, this doesn't seem like that ambitious. Like, it's a $35 million sophomore film with, big stars. The scope is obviously bigger, but, on paper, it makes sense. Like, okay, like I don't know how much Booksmart costs, but I would imagine somewhere between like $5 and $10 million.
It was definitely not this expensive. Booksmart cost like $6 million or something like that. It was, yeah.
Yeah.
And it was
I was going to say, yeah. And I was saying, yeah. Made hand over dollar. It made, a lot of money. It was a big critical hit, had like a 99% on Rotten Tomatoes or something like that. It was, an undeniable hit critically, financially, and it made sense that she would get the opportunity to make a nearly $40 million sophomore film, which, compared to like someone like Colin Trevorrow going from Safety Not Guaranteed to Jurassic World, like that's not that huge of a leap.
And hey, we got to get this across. Don't Worry, Darling has already made more money than Booksmart did.
Yeah, I mean, it's already doing pretty well, right? Did it make 20 million over the weekend?
It's at 30 million so far.
That's worldwide or domestic?
I believe that is worldwide, but mostly domestic. I don't think it's released in a lot of international markets yet. I'll double check that though, because I have a feeling with the Harry Styles connection, it might have some UK release on top of that. But
but I mean, I will say, for as much we'll likely criticize the film, I do not think this should be the end of Olivia Wilde's directorial career. I think she has certainly proven herself enough as a box office and critical success with Booksmart. And also, if this does well, I mean, certainly lesser directors who have had more controversy have gotten, second, third, and fourth, and however many films after this. I don't think, no matter what's going on behind the scenes with the film, that she should have to, stay in director's jail because of what's going on around the film.
Yeah, I think so, because, I mean, look, I think the reviews haven't been good, but I'm looking at the box office here, and 19.2 million domestic opening weekend, 10.8 million international. That's a 64-36 split to domestic, which is really, really good for a movie that's not based on any intellectual property. And it's a movie that does have this amount of controversy that could derail interest. Like, people would be like, well, I'm not going to spend my money on a movie that is just going to be, a bunch of drama and I don't care about. Clearly, people care about this, probably for lots of different reasons. I think Harry Styles has a huge fan base. I think Florence Pugh has a huge fan base, in the film world. It's a lot of different tribes uniting. What was your theater like? I got to ask, because mine was like 5 people.
Yeah.
And they were, this wasn't a screening. They didn't do screenings for this. And so, at least in my area. So this was a public thing. And I think it's going to be different from yours, because mine was like mostly young people. It was in Silicon Valley. So it was, it was a little bit different, and collective shrugs from the audience when the credits rolled about you.
I mean, so initially I was supposed to see the movie today. My plans got moved because we didn't get a chance to record Mad Men, available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts.
And theyoungfolks.com.
Yeah, theyoungfolks.com. There you go. So I had an extra carved amount of time on Friday to see this film during a matinee. And I was like, okay, I'll go see it at local mall. And I was the youngest person in the theater by, I want to say, at least 3 decades.
Well, you were watching a movie called Don't Worry, Darling on a Friday afternoon. So
I'm not saying it's like illogical or doesn't make any sense. I'm just saying that, like,
yeah, you were just like, wait a second, what?
My audience was significantly older than me, and it didn't really seem like they responded to the film. I don't know. I mean, I feel like like the person in front of me, they reacted more to when a certain hit song played in the Knock at the Cabin trailer than when, during the whole movie. So, like, I don't think they were really digging it. And I don't know about the people behind me, but it just seemed like they were kind of confused and not really, like, vocal about their response to the film, at least in the theater. So, I don't know. It didn't seem like they were loving it.
You have to imagine, like, people watching it being old enough that they're like, wait, haven't I seen this movie before? Wait, haven't I seen this movie before? And this movie, and this movie, and this movie. Because for me, that's kind of what I was getting at earlier with this spec script, and ultimately with where they went with this story. It is just, I think for me, my audience was like, that's it. Like, this has been done many times. Like, there has to be something else under the surface here. This is one of those weird movies where I just feel like so many loose ends, so many unanswered questions and pointless red herrings that I'm like, something went wrong here. Like, I don't think this was the movie they were really going for, I want to say, because there's a lot of stuff it looks like they cut out. And it's not a short movie. It's over 2 hours.
I'm not sure about that, but I will say, I mean, at least from a marketing standpoint, not that the trailers and anything have been bad. If anything, I thought the initial trailer was pretty good.
Still haven't seen it.
I will say, it did seem like, at least from people I was talking to, that there was some general confusion about, like, what kind of movie it was. Like, some folks I was talking to, they thought it was like a romantic drama in the vein of, like, Revolutionary Road, like something where it's like a marriage falls apart due to, like, whatever circumstances. And some people were like, no, it's like more of like a horror movie, kind of maybe like a glitzier version of like Blue Velvet. And some folks were like, no, it's like a Stepford Wives sort of thing. And like, no, it's, it's this thing and that thing. And then Olivia Wilde during the CinemaCon presentation, where she famously got served papers by her ex, Jason Sudeikis. She described
was like,
the film.
Just to be clear, this is based on the toy Lightyear from 1995.
I mean, it wouldn't have added any more confusion for her to say that, because she said something along the lines of, like, this movie, she was comparing it to, like, Inception and The Truman Show, which that one obviously makes sense, and another film, I'm trying to think what it is, but she compared it to 2 sci-fi films and then The Truman Show, which was like, okay, like, I don't get, watching the trailer, like, where's the sci-fi element coming into this? Like,
right.
It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, there's one movie in particular, like I want to bring up that I think it gives away too much if I say what movie it is. So that is, that's probably the biggest weakness of this movie is that it takes so long to tell you like what it is. Like by the time we get to it, it's just like, it's impossible not to spoil this movie, really. If you start being like, well, here are all the inspirations.
Yeah. Okay. So she said it was a combination of Inception, The Matrix, and The Truman Show. And I think that just caused more confusion than answers.
I'm sure.
Because what? Like,
I'll be honest, I wasn't paying much attention to all the drama around this movie that closely. I think it like once it really heated up at Venice, like once the Harry Styles and Chris Pine stuff started coming up, and because I remember seeing the stories, I remember seeing the rags coming along and being like there was drama on set. Olivia Wilde wasn't showing up because there's all the thing with like Olivia Wilde going through her divorce with Jason Sudeikis, her relationship with Harry Styles, apparently some falling out between her and Florence Pugh. Florence Pugh going through a breakup. Mm-hmm. It's just like all this stuff that like isn't our business.
Sure. Olivia Wilde and Jason Sudeikis were never married, just to be clear. But,
sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
There was like a nasty sort of breakup. There was, the director and star of the film were supposedly or allegedly hooking up, so to the point where Olivia Wilde was not, fulfilling maybe her full directorial duties. Florence Pugh was allegedly ghost directing some scenes because her director was absent. There was a shouting match apparently.
Yeah,
there was Spitgate at allegedly. But I don't really want to.
Supposed to be the main character, the main guy at one point. He was I think like in 2020 was when they were rounding out the cast for this, and then it was like last year that Harry Styles was added to replace him.
Right. But I mean, I think it's fun to kind of talk about this stuff because it's very like old Hollywood. Like it kind of reminds you of like an old.
Olivia Wilde, take a look at the picture. See, we heard all the rumors.
Yeah. Tell us about the rumors.
Styles being hot and heavy on set.
Yeah. So, but I mean, I don't really want to devote most of the conversation to that because I just feel like, for one, that's all gossip. Like you're saying, like it's none of our business, and two, I feel like there's enough to discuss on the film's merits or lack thereof that we don't really need to discuss that. But
we'll discuss it when the movie or documentary comes out. How about that? That's when it'll be appropriate, I think.
I mean, it's not like Apocalypse Now. Like it's not like insane. No, it's
much milder than that. Olivia Wilde.
Right. Yeah. Olivia Wilde. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that stuff's fun. I don't think it really adds or takes away from the film, but I'm sure it added or, maybe benefited the word of mouth,
the marketing. Yeah. The buzz. Mm-hmm.
But I mean, there is a part of me that like kind of wants this movie to succeed just because it does sort of represent this older sort of like adult, drama.
It's a swing.
From a studio like star-driven, movie that I feel like Warner Brothers in their current, state are probably not going to fund a movie like this in the near future.
So far as I can tell. Award season, because that's what kind of got this movie off the ground, right? It's like they premiered it through Venice. They clearly had Oscars, consideration for this. So I think that kind of thing is going to keep happening. It's just they can't control, what gets accepted and what gets rejected by, I guess, the critical consensus.
I just feel like there'd be more gun shy to greenlit something like this in the future. But I could be wrong. I don't know. I don't have a lot of trust in that. What's the guy's name? The new CEO of Warner Brothers Discovery.
Oh, Zaslav. I don't remember.
Yeah, whatever. I just feel like he's gonna, if he didn't inherit this movie from Toby Ermich, whatever the original CEO, I feel like he wouldn't have greenlit this film. I could be wrong, but that's just the vibe I get.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's we were still kind of getting to know cousin HBO here, the new boss, who has so far been not making a great impression, which I know we've talked about on other shows. So don't worry, darling. And I've been kind of avoiding the setup for it because it's just kind of secondary to me. But I mean, the basic setup is that you have this young, happy, in love couple played by Florence Pugh and Harry Styles. They live in this idyllic 1950s neighborhood. And it very much, like you and I have been covering Mad Men on Mad Men, available as a podcast on youngfolks.com with fellow co-host Michael Overholtz, where we've been talking about Mad Men, and we just finished up the first season of that show. You should listen and subscribe and talk to us about it. But that show is very much about how the 1950s and the 1960s, by extension, they're not like all they seem. Advertising played a huge part in the image of the 50s as it sort of shifted in the 1960s. So watching a movie like this, I think you and I were more primed than ever to sort of be like, okay, here is something we've seen a lot of times, the artifice of suburbia, a period of time that didn't exist the way that a lot of people like to wax nostalgic about, but nevertheless is a very, very iconic sort of, pastiche in both film and television, books, whatever you have. And we've had, at this point in 2022, we've had lots of movies throw harpoons at it and deconstruct the American dream utopia of the 1950s. So we have another movie like that kind of coming along, where Florence Pugh plays this housewife who she's living her life, she's loving it, but something's off. It's a company town, and it's called there's something called the Victory Project, and all the guys work at the same place, and the movie doesn't hide that something is off. From like very, very early scenes, you can tell like this isn't a typical, like there's something weird going on here. All the men leave at exactly the same time in their cars, and they're driving on a roadless, terrain toward a building that we can't quite make out the full extent of. And yeah, from then on, it's just sort of like, okay, something weird's going on. And so like for the first 30, 40 minutes, you're like, okay, so, Florence Pugh is starting to get a little bit suspicious because of certain things that have happened. There's a character played by Kiki Layne who is a little bit, she's kind of like, I don't know. Yeah, this doesn't feel right. Something's wrong. And then as Pugh starts to investigate, and you're like, okay, cool. That's what this movie is. It's going to be, Pugh sort of like trying to figure out what's going on. And then, of course, like the conflict with her husband, who loves the way things are. He's, again, played by Harry Styles, who's kind of, just a little bit of like a Ken doll in this. And then you're like, great, well, okay, let's get to the second act. Time for the second act. The second act is just the first act again, with just like a few wrinkles. Like there's a real failure of rising action in this movie, because then we get to the third act, and the third act is kind of another version of the first act, where it's just like, okay, we're gonna maybe slowly kind of maybe baby reveal a couple of things, but not really. And then the last like 15 minutes is the third act, where things allegedly get resolved. And to me, it's a failure of structure. It's a failure of editing. It's a failure of a lot of things. Here's what it's not a failure of: Florence Pugh's performance. I think everyone should agree. I think that it's really, really good in this. I think the look, feel, and flavor of the film is wonderful. This is Matthew Libatique, who's just, a cinematographer. I felt this location. They making a marinated steak, sizzle. It's not as easy as it sounds or looks or smells. There are things in here that work. Chris Pine works. Florence Pugh works. Their chemistry works. But it's all kind of mishmashed in what I think ultimately is a story that just doesn't work. What do you think?
I think there's a lot of things going on here, and I don't exactly know where it went wrong. As you mentioned, I don't know if it's like a script level thing, or if it's a failure of vision, or if it's just like a conflicting vision. But I will say that I think the concept is where the movie sort of falls apart, because it feels like you said, there's so much setup as far as the initial, like the reveal that's coming up 2/3 the way through, which I feel like it's kind of a given from the beginning, in a way that I just don't know if the filmmakers thought it would be more impressive than it was, or if they just didn't have enough ideas to really push it forward till we get to that point.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I feel like the stuff that happens in the third act, busy though it is way more interesting than what was set up before. Like, I think maybe it's a little bit more competent in the first 2/3 of the film, but it gets dull after a point, because it's just a lot of like sort of dream nightmare sequences where Florence Pugh is just like, things aren't as they seem. What's going on? It's a lot of like visual metaphors that don't really tie up to a lot of things later in the film.
They're directed well. I think Wilde is good at directing. Like, I actually think that like some of these scenes like constructed are interesting. Like, characters aren't just sitting around talking the whole time, but to what you're saying, like the metaphors don't really connect with the underlying substance of the story. It's very weird.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of stuff here that I feel like they're so focused on the aesthetics that the story tends to fall apart. Like, I think there's a lot focused here about how the movie should look, how the movie should sound, how the movie should feel. But I feel like it doesn't really add up to what it's trying to say. It feels more like the sum of its parts than a fully cohesive idea that comes together in a impactful or interesting way. And I guess I will say, I mean, I agree with a lot of what you said as far as like, I think the things that the movie does well, obviously I think the production design, the art direction, the costuming, all of that is tremendous. I do like the cinematography a lot. I like how this movie looks. I like I think it comes together visually in a very nice sort of way. I think it's even edited in a decent way. I kind of push back a little bit against what you're saying there.
I don't mean like the editing, like in moment to moment scenes. I just mean the editing and how the overall picture is put together.
The pacing of it does leave something to be desired and I think that's more a failure of the direction, though, that doesn't really have a good sense of building up momentum. And when it does do weird, interesting things, they don't really service the story. It just kind of feels secondary. But I guess where I am a little bit more critical of the film than you is that I don't think Florence Pugh is bad, but I feel like we've seen her do this type of performance much better in other films. Like, I don't think she's doing anything here that we've seen her not do better elsewhere. And that's not to say she's bad. Like I said, I think she does a fine job. I think she handles the role well, but I feel like the material doesn't really let her shine in a way that I'm like, oh yeah, this is another great Florence Pugh performance. I'm like, yeah, it's pretty good, but like compared to Lady Macbeth, compared to Midsummer, like she's not really bringing her like A game here, I don't think. And I think
I push back that against that a lot. I think what she's doing in those movies is so different from this. I mean, I can't think of a movie she's done that's quite like this performance at all. I think like she's been a protagonist, but I mean, in Midsummer, like I think that is a much more like teary-eyed. She's a totally different character. I think what the soft melancholy she brings to that role is completely different. Little Women, what there's nothing I think between those performances that aside from it's her that I would put on the movie. And then I don't know, what movie are you thinking of here? Because and then Lady Macbeth,
mostly Midsummer.
She's delicious in that movie as like the villain.
Sure.
Okay,
yeah, but I guess what I'm trying to say here is that I feel like her performance. Like, I feel like a lot of her characterization in the film leaves a lot to be desired as far as, I agree with you that those characters that she played in those films are a lot more dynamic and complex and nuanced because I think the material allows them to be more complex and nuanced and dynamic. I just feel like her character here is mostly reacting to things that are happening around to her, which is fine, but it doesn't really allow us to get a full, clear understanding of who her character is outside of her reacting to what's going on around her. And I think
there's more. I don't know. I think there's more to the performance than reactionary. I think for her, it's like there's a lot of conflict with her character. That's what I found interesting. That's where I found the meat of the character. Well, it's the conflict of like she loves her husband, wants to trust him, but she feels like she's being gaslit. And she's also conflicted because like she has this crisis mode of like, my life is amazing. Why should I complain? But then also like, I want to, obviously like know what's going on. I want to care about other people, but do I care about my husband? I don't know. There's more conflict to her character than I think you're letting on.
That's fair. I mean, I get what you're saying. I just feel like there was more avenues with the film to explore that in a way that would have made her performance a little bit more well-rounded. And I feel like the film itself, its inability to really focus on these things and just introduce them, but not really tie them into a full narrative, ultimately lets her performance suffer in the process. But that's again.
I mean, yeah, like where I would sit with that is I think for Pugh, what could have made for me that performance even more well-rounded, because I don't think it's a perfect, like she did nothing wrong, nothing like that.
Sure.
Like, I'm not standing.
And I think she's a tremendous actress. Like, I mean, I think. I mean, if this is one of her lesser performances, then she has so many great performances ahead of her, and she's already done so much great work already. So, I mean, I just think she's lacking a sparring partner in this. Like, she has Chris Pine, but barely. And there's even like a flicker, right? Like, you get a little bit of like, okay, what if the movie really was about these two? And like, it was more like that cat and mouse game, and then it just drops it after a scene. That's disappointing. And then she's like, well, we're back to it being her and Harry Styles. And it's like, I feel like I'm watching her,
drag around her like kid little brother, like who's new to acting, and she's got to show him the ropes.
I think she would have had a great sparring partner with Gemma Chang if the movie allowed that character to have a little bit more of a central focus, because there's like one dinner scene with the two of them where it introduces like, okay, like this is an interesting concept. Like, what if these two characters are kind of at odds? Like the one sort of represents a different sort of femininity, a sense of comfort and complacency.
That's why I feel like they cut stuff out, because like there's all kinds of stuff with the Gemma Chan character that makes no sense. Like there's stuff that happens with her where you're just like,
oh yeah, like
what does that mean?
The last scene with her character, I'm still baffled as far as like, what does that mean? Like, what if this is all this?
That's my main criticism with the editing. I just think like there's got to be stuff that they took out that they thought wouldn't matter, or they thought like, oh, the ambiguity is what will drive this along. It's like, instead of a clarifying scene or a scene that like lends to the world building, we got to do another sort of like Florence Pugh staring at something weird going on and wondering what is happening, and we got to do that 4 more times.
Yeah, and that's my central complaint, but I will allow that there's more going on than just that in the film with her character. But in any case, should we talk about the Harry Styles performance, or we kind of already teed it, but do you want to?
It's okay. It's okay. It's the guy playing varsity when he barely can make JV. That's the problem. I don't think it's a bad performance, but I mean, it can't look that good when you're up against Chris Pine and Florence Pugh and Gemma Chan. No. I think, buddy.
I mean, I was going to use a different high school analogy, which is like, what if the like hot lacrosse player was the lead of the high school play?
Right.
And I think like, and it's like,
I like how you pick lacrosse.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like, that's not a football player. I'm sorry. Harry Styles, nothing against him. He's not a football player. He's not like a basketball player. I don't think it's like lacrosse. But anyway.
Okay. We'll go with the Teen Wolf. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. No, Teen Wolf
why
would
not
be
soccer?
Basketball.
He's a Brit.
Sure.
Like it.
Whatever analogy you want to use, you can use in this scenario. The point is that he's like kind of like an athlete coming into this in a way. It's like, it's more like, well, like for someone, getting their first starring role, he's like, okay, but I feel
he's
like
been in first starring, but he was in Dunkirk, and wasn't he in something else?
He's going to be in My Policeman coming up this fall.
That's right. Yeah.
I don't think he has any other.
He had a small little scene in Eternals.
Right. But in any case, I think like in terms of general acting or screen acting, where it's like, does he hit his marks? Does he say his lines? Does he emote? Sure. But I feel like this is where it kind of comes down to like, what is acting? What is a performance? Because I get the sense when I'm watching the film, and maybe this is too harsh, but I see him acting, but I feel like there's not a lot of spark going on in his eyes. Like, I feel like he's not really putting a lot of thought into like the characterization. He's putting more thought into like, I need to say these lines. I need to say in this way. And I need to like look a certain way when I'm doing it. And I feel like it's not really like him forming a character. It's him
there is
kind
one
of trying to
where,
figure out.
There's one scene where it comes out though, Will.
Okay.
There is. That honesty that I think you're talking about, that drive of like, I'm acting in order to give my soul to the audience, it happens.
Sure.
The dancing scene. Because
that's the most interesting scene in the film.
That's the scene where that's Harry Styles. And he's just like, you want me to dance for you? I'm already one of the most cherished, singers in the world. Millions and millions of people love me. And you want me to act now? All right, I'll act for you. I'll spin around 5 times. I'll do whatever you want. It's like, that to me felt like Harry Styles woke up and was just like, yeah, this is a performance that actually is like coming from his heart a little bit. And it's unhinged, but it's
I mean
pretty brilliant.
I think the performance in general is fairly earnest. Like, I don't think it's incompetent for a lack of trying. Like, I think he is giving what he wants. I mean, it's like he's trying to learn how to act in a very public, in a pretty big film. So I feel a little bad for the guy, but like, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't be dissuaded to see another film from him, but I still don't get the sense of like, okay, why is he in films? Like, why are we touting him as our next like musician turned actor, and I'm still not other than like he's famous and he's very popular as a pop musician. I'm still not really seeing like what's the like intrigue here, and I think part of it is casting. Like I think he became a star too quick and too early. Like I think he would be better served in supporting roles where he can kind of like do like what Justin Timberlake did in Alpha Dog. I think that's the name of the film, or like in the Social Network. I think that makes sense. It's kind of the same issue like when Justin Timberlake had like a role like that in Social Network. It's like, oh, okay, so he can act, and then you get him in Time. And it's like, well, like he's holding his own, but like he's not like a movie star. He's just like kind of like doing what he thinks a movie star is.
You put him in Friends with Benefits, and it's just sort of like, this. It's very functional, but it's definitely not sort of like it had to be him.
Right. But, and that's where I think his performance is like it's functional, but it just lacks a spark.
My only criticism of your metaphor is that, okay, like being the lead athlete doing the school play, you're kind of suggesting it's like two completely different worlds and like he's not suited for, I guess is the implication. But I think there's a little bit more of like connective tissue between being a rock star musician and being an actor. They're obviously very different disciplines, but they both involve performance, right? I guess you could say like when you're an athlete going into like the school play, you're kind of going from something that's just very competitive and something very like, and I don't know, like a different view of masculinity to a play, which is more, artistic, I guess. Is that fair?
Well, I actually didn't really get to finish my analogy, which is that I think when you put him in a film like this, or sorry, let me back up. When you put him in like a play and you're like, your expectations are kind of lower and like you see him holding his own enough to like where the thing doesn't fall apart because of him. You're like, oh, okay, maybe he's holding his own. But it's like, what if you took that star athlete who did one play and then you put him in a Broadway production with like Hugh Jackman? And it's like, okay, like, yeah, like in a high school production, like he's holding his own, he's fine. But when you put him in the big leagues in like a starring role, then like, yeah, he's obviously not going to like stand out. And I feel like
isn't that kind of similar to what we do with like putting LeBron, in Trainwreck? I guess what you're saying, he isn't the star of Trainwreck, but like, I think that like when you have somebody who's like the epitome of like sports, and then put them into the epitome of Hollywood, I feel like there is a little bit less of like a lightning bolt of weirdness that happens.
Well, what I was going to say, I'm sorry I keep like backing this up, but I feel like when he was in Dunkirk, people were like, oh, he's like actually a good actor. And I think they were too quick to jump the gun because like he had like 3 lines or something in that movie. I was going to
say, people were saying he was a good actor. Like, what? No, he was just in it.
But I think the confusion is that like, I think he can hold his own as a screen presence. Like when you watch him in scenes where he's not like talking in this movie, he's not like he's a compelling screen presence. Like I think he can do some stuff like non-verbally that makes you like, okay, like there's something here. Like I can kind of like see the clay being molded a little bit, but I just think like he can't hold a monologue. That's where it's.
I think this is where I land on it because like I get what you're saying. It's just to me, I just think it's like I almost feel like we're overthinking it. I think what it comes down to is like all reports say that first of all, the guy's super famous. People are going to watch a movie just because he's in it. So that's step one. And Hollywood is just like, yes, hired. The other thing is that like to what you're saying, he's competent enough. Like he can say his lines. He has some screen presence. Okay, yeah, he's not DiCaprio, but whatever. Like he doesn't need to be Christopher Abbott. Sure. The other thing is that it really seems like people just like him. Like people like to work with him. Like one of the things about Dunkirk, like he has all that like cachet as a big shot, I guess, or like not even big shot, but like as a recognizable household name. But apparently he doesn't have like a roaring ego that makes him difficult to work with from what people have said. And that's how things are right now. I am just speculating, but I think that is a recipe for like, yeah. This guy needs to be like our next big thing because Hollywood wants that stability. They don't want the chaos of somebody who is just like super famous, but, or somebody who's really good at acting like Shia LaBeouf, but, is just chaos, is going to cause all kinds of havoc no matter what.
Yeah. And that gets into an argument. Argument's a strong word, but a disagreement that we had away from the mic, which is that for all the baggage that Shia LaBeouf would have brought to the film, I think he's undeniably would have made the film, if not better, at least more interesting. If he's still
I think he would have. I don't think it would have worked. I think that what probably would have happened is I think he and Pugh would not have gotten along And I think that like if that central relationship doesn't work, like if you don't buy that they're actually in love, which I actually buy that, I think Pugh and Stiles have, I just they just have the chemistry that you need to sell the opening artifice of the movie. I think if you put LaBeouf in there, it instantly becomes like a total, like the tone suddenly becomes like you need to escape this. It just becomes way more black and white, even though you're introducing the nuance of a more esteemed actor. That's where I stand.
I mean, I guess where I disagree is that I think Shia LaBeouf has more range than you're anticipating. I mean, it's impossible to know if the movie would have been better or worse, or if his performance would have been better, because we don't know. He quit the film by his admission. Whether, you know, he was forced to quit or he chose to quit, he is not in the film, and we'll never see his performance in this film. But I just feel like he has demonstrated more sort of dynamic range in playing characters who are both sort of boyish and puppy dog like, and who guys who have like kind of an edge and a chip on their shoulder, who, you know, can be more aggressive and more assertive in a way that I feel like Harry Styles, without giving too much away, can't really sell the third act of the film. Like, I agree with you that I think he can hold his own for the second two.
I really want to get into that though. Should we wrap up our non-spoiler stuff here? Because I feel like we just got to lean in.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess if there's some more non-spoiler things, we can talk about that now.
I mean, I think my general thing with the movie is I've kind of touched on this. The more I think about it, the more I'm just like, what did any of that really mean? There's so much that happened in the movie. There's so many loose ends, unanswered questions. Like, it's one of those things where, like, when you get a twist, the twist should contextualize the rest of the movie, so that when you think about it again, or you think about rewatching it, everything kind of clicks into place. But I'm thinking back on the movie and I'm just like, well, what did that mean? Why was that there? Like, what was the point of that? And I can't think of any good answers. And I tried looking up, like, have people started to try to like untangle this thing? And I haven't really come across anything that's been like, you know, there's this whole thing with like an airplane, and somebody sees an airplane. Is the airplane really there? And then this little kid had a toy airplane that looks just like it. And what could that mean? And it feels like the movie is just sort of like, it means whatever, just fill in the blank. And then it's stuff like that like really, really turns me off to like, okay, well, if your story is not going to be that original, and if your twist isn't going to be that like devastating or sort of like subversive, then I don't know. I just find myself checking out of it, even though like I feel bad, because it's not like I was watching this movie and I was annoyed the whole time. I wasn't sitting there just being like, oh, let it end. I was interested. I was genuinely invested. And I was like, well, cool. Like, I want to know what's going on here. And I was like, I have my theories, but I feel like those are too obvious. Like, I feel like this movie's really setting this up. Like, I know you touched on that. It's like the payoff must be insane. And then we get to the payoff and I'm like, oh, okay. Like that's kind of like where I think like a lot of people have been reacting. They're just like, oh, it ends. And they're just like, okay. And it's just very, there's something very off. I feel like I'm, you know, in a very similar situation as Florence Pugh. Some weird is going on with this movie.
I mean, my takeaway from the film, to tie it to a scene in this movie, early on, Florence Pugh is in the kitchen and she's cracking eggs. Each egg in the carton is revealed to not have anything in it. It's this hard exterior with nothing inside. And that doesn't tie into anything into the story. It's all service of metaphor, where it's like everything isn't what it seems, isn't what it looks like, you know, an obvious but, you know, clear metaphor. And I feel like that is the film in a nutshell, or an eggshell.
In a nutshell, yeah.
It's this very pretty hard exterior that once you crack it, there's nothing really inside it. And you're like, well, where's the yolk? Like, where's the egg? It's just the shell. And I feel like that was my takeaway from the movie, is just that it looks nice. I think it came together visually and aesthetically in a nice way. But the more, like you said, the more you think about it, the more you try to crack the shell, the more you realize that there's just not a lot. I think there's not a lot of thought that went into it. If there is a lot of thought, the thoughts they had sort of conflicted with one another, which we can discuss a little bit more. I really just want to kind of sit Olivia Wilde down and be like, okay, in the simplest way possible, what did you want this movie to be? And like, what was your general takeaway? And it's like, okay, if that's the case, then why did you include this stuff? And I don't know. I mean, I feel like she would tie herself in a knot trying to explain this whole thing, because the one thing doesn't complement the other. And so therefore it's just this pretty exterior that internally just didn't, there's nothing to really, chew on.
I'm just a little sad that she's not probably going to be in one of those like, Oscars like director roundtable things, like maybe at the same tables like Darren Aronofsky and Alexander Inarritu or whoever else, and just like let them sort of like be the ones to ask her. It's like, so what were you trying to accomplish with that movie, Olivia? I was just really curious if you could talk about that a bit more. I don't know who has this accent that I'm putting on right now, but you get what I'm saying.
Oh, good old Christopher Nolan. I don't know. I mean, I remember, I forget what it was for, but she had an interview, I think on either Jimmy Kimmel or David Letterman, like while she was making Booksmart. And she said that true progress would come for feminism when a woman could make a bad or mediocre film and still have a career. And I think that'll be the true test of progress.
Yeah, I'm rooting for her.
Yeah,
I am. I think that her directing kind of salvaged this movie to an extent. So that's my theory anyway. I could be totally wrong. But,
or was it Pugh's directing?
That we'll never know. But yeah. I mean, look, Florence Pugh, I think she's a dynamo. And so I won't be surprised if she one day becomes one of our great producers, director, talents, in addition to her acting. So
yeah,
she's proven herself plenty already to get me on her team. Team Pugh. All right. Let's play the Rotten Tomatoes game, and then we'll do some spoiler talk on Don't Worry, Darling.
Well, I think I got spoiled on this one.
What?
I think I got spoiled.
You might have gotten spoiled. Okay, well, let's see. Let's find out. We have 235 reviews counted. Lots of people were saying like, well, I'm worried. And so I got to put I'm worried that my Rotten Tomatoes review won't count. So they made sure. What do you think the critic score is, Will Ashton, for Don't Worry, Darling, as we record this?
So I had heard that the score was a 33%, but that's not my guess.
Okay.
I think the film is going to slightly benefit from people hearing all this bad publicity, watching the film, and being like, yeah, that wasn't that bad. Like it looked nice. It's a film. It's not like a movie. It's a film. Even though I think it was shot on digital. But, I think people are going to be a little bit more receptive with time, but not to the point where it'll be reevaluated and reclaimed. So I'm going to say 42%.
You were on the right track.
Okay, and I just kept going off.
Your thought process was sound. You were right to perk that score up a bit. But I think, Will, you got your head a little bit in the clouds. Your metaphor was the eggshell. I think my metaphor for this movie was the plane crash. For the two of us, it's somewhere in between. And so that's why the Rotten Tomato score is about 38%. So, hey, splitting the difference, like kind of right in the center there. So very good effort on your part, especially since you had the score spoiled for you at one point. But you have another chance to redeem yourself, Will Ashton, because we have the audience score. You have 500 plus verified ratings. Time to compile, everything you've learned from all of our years and decades of doing the Rotten Tomatoes game. What do you think?
Decades. I feel like the style fans are coming in the movie's mild defense, but not to the point where they push the score into the fresh category, but higher than the critical analysis. So I'll say 57%.
Again, your thought process started strong. You were clearly on the right track, but then you were just like, you were a little bit too cautious on this one, a little bit too, I don't know, a little bit too measured. 79%. Yeah, no, the Styles fans showed up and they were like, this is it. This is the movie to watch.
I'm very curious to hear if the Style fans like the film.
I mean, I've seen them kind of just be like, now this is like a good movie. I've seen people just kind of go to bat. Do you know if any, we got to do cinema score, but I mean, do you know of any like friends of the show who have really liked it? I know one, a former co-host. Abby Olchesi.
Yeah. I was going to say,
she gave it a fresh review.
How fresh?
That's right.
No. I mean, how fresh?
She didn't have like a score attached to it. I didn't see, but
okay.
Also a friend of the show, May Abdelbaki, gave it a passing grade, but she was a little. It wasn't like an A. Corey Woodruff, I think you've heard of him. He also gave it a passing grade. I think he liked it.
He liked it. Yeah, I was gonna say. I know he said he was in the minority in liking the film. So
I think it's a slighter minority than some people are kind of. And then also Emma Sasek, she liked it as well. She's like a reporter in the Palm Springs area where they filmed it. So, There you go. That's like a nice little advertisement if you're ever like, you know what, Palm Springs, like the movie with Andy Samberg and Kristen Milioti. Well, now you can say, "Don't Worry, Darling" as well.
Anyway, let's see.
Cinema score.
Cinema score. I almost call it the Metacritic score. Cinema score. I'm going to say C+.
You're only one off. So is it a C or a B-?
My gut says C, but I feel like it's been proven wrong the past 2 times. So I'm going to say B-.
For once, you went with your gut and you stuck to it, and there you go, Ashton. B-. Well done. Okay. And then we're on Letterboxd. And Will, I don't know how to tell you this.
Okay.
Because, we've been doing this a lot, where we look at the Letterboxd, and, most of the movies where we're just like, okay, well, how many logs on Letterboxd, right? Yeah, usually, like, even some of the biggest movies, well, it gets as high as like maybe like 50,000 for some of the bigger ones, maybe higher. Most movies we're talking about, it's going to be like 10,000, 20,000. Woman King, I think, was around 20,000. Don't Worry, Darling is at 87,000 watches. Not a Marvel movie. It's not Jurassic Universe. It's none of that. It's not a big franchise thing. It is a September drama, like Venice International Film Festival.
I think it's technically a thriller.
Thriller, sure. Psychological, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually one of my complaints. That I didn't think it was very thrilling.
Nah, there's not a lot of tension in the movie. Well, part of the reason there's not a lot of tension is because it's like the same scenes over and over again in terms of how they're constructed.
Well, okay, the joke I was going to make is all the tension was happening behind the scenes, that there was no room for tension in front of the camera.
There you go. Well, to me, it was more of like, it's like if you took a Black Mirror episode and you were like, what's great about those Black Mirror episodes is that they're usually like 20, 30 minutes. If you do it for 2 hours and you wait to get to the good part. Anyway.
Sure.
Okay. Letterboxd. What do you think the average rating is from 0 to 5?
I'm going to say 2.4.
No, whoa. Way off. It's 3.2.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, Will, I get it. This is a chaotic movie. I wasn't expecting you to like call. I would have actually been a little suspicious if you had nailed any of these. So that said, Don't Worry, Darling it's in theaters now. You have a chance to watch it. I'm looking at the Letterboxd scores right now, and I mean, they're all over the place. I'm seeing some people give it 2 stars. I'm seeing friends of the show like Amanda the Jedi give it 3. Other friend of the show, Allison Johnson, give it 2 stars. I mean, I don't know what to do. Everybody has a different opinion. Isaac Feldberg, he's like, 2 stars, that's probably more than it deserves. Who knows? So that's Don't Worry, Darling. Still want to talk spoilers, Will Ashton?
Oh, you bet I do. Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, though, I mean, I don't know. Your timeline seems to be a lot kinder to film. I've seen like 1 3-star or like 4-star review and 1 3.5 star. Everything else is like 3 or 2 or 2.5.
Yeah, I'm mostly seeing scores between 1 to 2.5, with the occasional 3. One person gave it 5 stars. I don't know. I don't think you know this person. Okay.
Anyway, spoilers. For Don't Worry, Darling.
Don't Worry, Darling. Okay, I just wanted to bring this up. All right.
Okay.
I think it kind of works to the movie's favor, at least theoretically, that it's Harry Styles. Because the whole thing where he's just like such a loser, and there's actually something kind of subversive about it. It's like if you try to do the same thing with Shia LaBeouf, it feels a little bit too like the whole scene where he's like at the computer being like all whiny and lame, and Florence Pugh's character is just kind of like, I worked this long shift, and I think the way that Styles is able to balance the 2 personas and this wish fulfillment and this artifice of like who he is as like a rock star versus maybe a version of like this kind of stereotypical like incel kind of dude, that like I think he's reaching for something that's kind of interesting there. And I can't imagine it working with Shia LaBeouf the same way. I just feel like it would be a little bit too like what, with him, because we might have gotten too many echoes of it before. Whereas like when you see him in the first parts of the movie, it's like I feel like I'm seeing like Harry Styles being like his usual like super charming and boyish. And there's even the whole thing where like one of the big giveaways that this is set in the modern day is the way that he treats her is very like, there is something to that sort of like the submissive, like nice guy kind of persona where there's obviously a monster lurking underneath waiting to be pulled in by whatever, right-wing reactionary like Jordan Peterson, Andrew Tate kind of thing that I think this movie is drawing into that I actually think is kind of interesting. I wish that it had been done better and that the message could have been a little bit more crisp, but I don't have a problem with it in theory. So,
all right. So a few things about that, I'll say. I don't know where to start, but how there's some, there are like some actors where it's like, I can't believe them in a period piece because they know what a cell phone is. I'm not saying that that's not the example I'm giving with Harry Styles. The example I was going to say is like with Harry Styles, I feel like he's the type of person where like I don't believe he's ever listened to a podcast, let alone a podcast by a pseudo Jordan Peterson. Like I just don't get that. But he has
glasses on, Will. Didn't you see that they put acne,
they dirtied his hair
on his face?
Yeah, they gave him glasses. And it's just like, okay, like you can do that, but it doesn't make me believe it. I mean, like I admire him for trying to get into that. I think that's something where if he had maybe more experience and was able to challenge himself more as an actor, he could pull it off maybe at a later point. I just think right now it just feels like cosplay of a nerd.
That's what I mean. It's like, I like it in theory. In theory, it should work. But it just doesn't quite land especially because it comes so late in the film for me, but also because it's like, he just doesn't have it,
I mean, and the other analogy there is that when Mike Nichols made The Graduate, at one point he was talking to Robert Redford, and he was like, "I want to play the main character. I want to play Dustin Hoffman's character." And he's like, "You can't play that part." And he's like, "Well, why not?" And he's like, "Have you ever scored out with a girl?" And he was confused. He didn't get the joke. Like he
was like, "Wait, people score out with a girl?"
Right. And I feel like I can't get the vibe that Harry Styles is an incel because I feel like he's never had to score out with a girl or a guy.
Well, I guess because like we use the term incel a little bit loosely here, but I mean they are actually like married, right? He's not an incel in the most desperate sort of like
yeah, but he's an incel in like the opposite way. It's like he can't have enough sex with Florence Pugh, so he turns to Jordan Peterson. Because Harry,
there's something to that, I think, in terms of like the anxiety of men in the modern day, and like I think that he kind of presents as somebody. He's not like a black and white monster of misogyny. He is like, I think, a more dangerous version of misogyny. One that that's why away from the mic, I brought up Black Christmas. There's a character in that movie that was kind of similar, where it's like the guy kind of says the right things. He's kind of like that white liberal guy who like presents himself as like an ally, but underneath, like if you really dig down, it all is kind of a performance, or even if they don't know that it's insincere, there is this sort of driving away that they can easily fall victim to the kind of like Jordan Peterson stuff, if that makes sense.
I mean, not to say that this movie I'm going to compare it to is better, but I think I have more respect for it after a film like Don't Worry, Darling, and that's Serenity, which is a film where
that was a movie I was like, I wanted to compare it, but I was like, if you bring up Serenity, I think Matrix to an extent too. I was surprised you said that one. It's like, I think bringing up the movie, it gives a little bit too much away.
That was Olivia Wilde. That's the only reason I said it, because Olivia Wilde said that to sell the film. So yeah, I mean, I was surprised she said that. And I mean, if I hadn't heard that from her, I would maybe be... I don't think there's any version of this where I'm taken aback by the sci-fi angle, but it would have been a little bit more jarring, I guess.
Because the rules make no sense to me. Like, the world makes no sense to me. Like, none of this makes sense. Well, and I get it. Like, not every little thing needs to be explained, but we need something. Like, I don't want to get all CinemaSins with this, but it's just like... it takes me out too easy. Like, these questions are too obvious of like, how could he possibly have her captive like this? Wouldn't anybody be looking for her? What about the other women? Like, how is this possible? How are all of these guys leaving at exactly the same time? How is Harry Styles' character making enough money to do this when it was established he lost his job? None of this makes sense. Like, the rules of the simulation make sense. How does he feed her? Like, what? Like, you can feel things like...
Yeah.
Why does he die and she doesn't? If like,
Yeah, like how long has she been held captive like this? Is this like is her brain been tricked to think it's her whole life, or has it been like a few days? I don't know. And then and
like,
then there's
they're like, you have to take your medication. Why doesn't he just give her medication like on the bed?
Right.
Like doesn't. And then when she wakes up at the end, how does she escape? She's tied up. Did she escape earlier in the movie? Because she did the same thing earlier in the movie. So.
Right. And then, like with the stuff with the plane and the egg and all that, so like, I get the symbolism of it, but like, is that a glitch in their system, or is that?
I think the egg makes a little bit more sense because you could be like, oh yeah, it's a glitch, but like the plane doesn't make sense because it's like, why? The earthquakes. What was up with the earth?
Yeah, the earthquakes. Exactly. Yeah.
It reminds me of Lost. Like I didn't watch that much of Lost, but I remember it was like the same kind of thing people were annoyed with. It was just like, well, they kept bringing in all these other things to keep you guessing. It's like the mystery box J.J. Abrams thing. It's like it's just to sort of get you to ask questions without the intent to ever answer the questions in a satisfying way.
Well, that's what I mean by it's like I feel it's all aesthetics as opposed to story, because I think there's an attempt here, and this I feel annoying by giving this comparison, but I say it because I think Olivia Wilde's trying to do a Blue Velvet thing. So I think there are attempts to do a sort of Lynchian thing where like it's not supposed to really like make sense, quote unquote, but you're supposed to kind of like feel enraptured in the dream like experience of it, which I'd be cool with if it was either less story focused and more kind of cerebral, or if it was tighter story and we could understand the logic of it more. It's just like you have to, you can either be David Lynch or Christopher Nolan. You can't try to do both. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and you also, Twilight Zone has done this for the longest time. Like not the newer Twilight Zone, I haven't seen it, but like that's a really great example of like taking in your commentary, that sort of sci-fi commentary, and making it part of the story, right? They connect to each other and they get you asking questions about like, how would this apply in my real life? This movie just doesn't have enough of that toward the end to really bring that about. It doesn't challenge or try to bring sort of forward, the philosophy of the Harry Styles character. It all just kind of just comes to a head very quickly and sloppily. Mm-hmm. The car chase, her killing him with the whiskey glass, and like it's just all this stuff just happens without it really clicking into, this is how the story needed to go.
Yeah, and not to mention the Gemma Chan thing where she kills Chris Pine for reasons I still don't know. Sense. Well, I don't get, like, was that like her overriding the system? What does it matter if she kills Chris Pine? It's all a simulation. They're all going to be, zeros and ones. I mean, so like, what point does that mini revolution do? Is it just like a mini girl boss moment? Like, what's going on? Like, it's it's just adds like I think there's just a lot of conflicting ideas here, and I think one of the biggest examples is that, like we have the story here that is about male oppression, is about gaslighting, it's about gatekeeping in a very sort of literal sense. But there are also several scenes in the movie where Harry Styles goes down on Florence Pugh, which on its own is not a bad thing. Like, I think showing female pleasure is a totally valid thing to do, and I think it's something that a lot of filmmakers should strive for. But it would be like having scenes in The Handmaid's Tale where Elizabeth Moss gets like eaten out like here and there, and it's just like, man, this is a oppressive society. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I'm all for like.
I think that's one of. I disagree with you there. I actually think that stuff makes sense to me in terms of what they're trying to do, because I think the idea is that he feels so guilty, like he knows this is wrong.
Okay.
And I think he is that kind of guy, like I was saying before, where he thinks he's an ally and he thinks like, well, I go down on women. That means I'm not a misogynist. I think that's what it's playing at. It's just like, as long as I give her pleasure, I don't have to like give her freedom or treat her like a human being. She is like a possession. And he has to do just like that kind of thing in order to make her happy. And I think that's the kind of stuff where I'm like, okay, that is an interesting way to subvert your message a bit, because it's saying like, guys, you can do nice things. You can be a nice guy, but like that doesn't mean you're not a monster. That doesn't mean that you don't have bad intentions, and you put people, not just women but men too, into like boxes where they're being oppressed and they're in a terrible situation, and you're just satiating them with like superficial stuff. I think that there's a core of that in this movie, or not a core of it, a nugget of it, but that's where I push back.
Sure, and I think that's valid, and I would hope that's the intent from Olivia Wilde and the filmmakers here. And I think that would, and I mean, I think that's where we're kind of getting into what you're talking about with the complexity with Harry Styles' character, the intended complexity with his character, where he does seem to genuinely love his wife and he wants to, make her happy, and he wants to put her in this, like, what he perceives to be a safe haven for her, but he has her under his control. But yeah, I don't know. I just feel like the film's desire to want to kind of do both at the same time still doesn't really work here, because they don't really expound upon the ideas that they're dealing with here. I think that intent would be noble if it could actually make the film a little bit more dense and layered. And I think that would that's why I was kind of wondering why they reserved like this twist for like the third half or the third act, when I feel like if it was introduced earlier, like it is in like Serenity, that would have made the film a lot more interesting, and it could have dived into stuff a little bit more, as opposed to making it like a twist, like making that kind of core to the story would kind of make it a more, a little bit more dynamic and a little bit more investing film, as opposed to just kind of waiting for the inevitable to happen.
Yeah.
At the third act.
I do have kind of a, off the wall theory about that. And I base it kind of around the differences between, I think, the original story, the spec script, versus Silberman's take on it when she did the screenplay. And I think I get the sense that the original conceit of the movie was supposed to be tying a little bit more closely to Alice in Wonderland. Main character is Alice, right? There's a lot of like the looking glass metaphors. Her best friend's name is Bunny. There's a little bit of like the rabbit hole, sort of thing that kind of ties to the Matrix. I think that there was more of that going on in the story. And I think my guess is that like when Wilde and Silberman got a hold of it, they just kind of went down a few detours, or they tried to do different things with it as it kind of came about, because you can kind of feel like the Bunny character, for example, probably should have been a bigger presence. I mean, she kind of disappears for large portions of the movie. The implications of her character are inherently fascinating. Somebody who knows what's going on, but is choosing to inflict this harm on people she ostensibly cares about. And then, there's a lot there, but of course there's no investigation. And so like, I think that, again, I just think it's a script that kind of got away from them, that in an effort to sort of make it work on screen. And so maybe it's a lesson learned, I guess, because that's, making movies is Will, I don't know if you know this, but making movies ain't easy.
Make movies is hard. That is true. But yeah, I will say, I mean, I definitely agree with you as far as the Bunny character, because I actually thought that Olivia Wilde was like, her performance was pretty good in the film. Though I don't believe, like, even if I didn't know about the feud, I would probably could tell, because I never got the sense that these two were friends. Like, even when they were supposed to be joking, I'm just like, do these two hate each other?
I had a similar vibe with like Olivia Wilde and like Nick Kroll, who I'm just kind of like, are they really married? Is he real?
Right.
Does he not exist? Because I was just kind of like, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I love Nick Kroll, but I thought his performance in this was pretty actively bad. Likewise, not that she's bad, but I was kind of confused as to why they cast, I think her name's Katie Berlant. She's a comedian. Yeah. She has like a supporting role in this, and she's just like there, pretty much.
She's like, the pregnant one.
Yeah, she's like not really like funny, and she doesn't really have like a character in it, so she's just kind of like
she's one of the wives.
Yeah. It's like, why cast her? Like, she's like so good in like her segment on I Think You Should Leave, which I think is such a great thing. And I also heard that her recent Hulu special that I believe Bo Burnham directed is quite good.
Isn't she like supposed to be known for being kind of an absurdist, improvisational actor? So it's like a comedian, I should say. So like, yeah, it's kind of weird in a movie like this that they didn't really do much with that.
Yeah, because I was just kind of wondering, like, is there going to be something more to her character? Because you hire, such a dynamic sort of comedian like this. Like, is there going to be something in the third act or something where, expand it? Likewise with Nick Kroll. And it's just like, no, they're just kind of there. Kiki Layne's here.
I kind of have that same feeling, though, with, like, Chris Pine, who I think is... I think should be more in the movie, I guess. There's so many open questions I had about him. It's like, I just wish like this movie could have shown us more. It could have shown us a little bit more of like what's going on in the real world with this guy, like give us a hint, maybe that ties into the Gemma Chan thing. And I think this movie should have been the cat and mouse game between him and Pugh. Because whenever it was, I was interested. I was just like, oh, thank goodness. Like we're actually watching these two characters have it out, and it's interesting, and there's energy. There's actually like a spark, that I think like Pugh and Styles, their thing is just so one dimensional. It's just sort of, once we get to the gaslighting stuff, and I'm sorry, has a movie trope been so quickly like overplayed as gaslighting? Like it's been done so many times now. So quickly, it's already been lampooned by bodies.
Sure.
I don't know. There's something to it where I'm just like, I get it. Like I get the drama of it, but
considering that the term was already coined by a film called Gaslighting, about gaslighting, you just kind of think like, why don't they just do like an outright remake of that if they're just going to keep doing that story over and over again?
It's like every screenwriter in Hollywood at the same time, like read about gaslighting on a Twitter thread and then all put it in their screenplays at the same time. And it's just like like a constant influx now. We're getting stuff like this and false positive. It's just like, okay, sure. Okay.
I think I preferred False Positive to this film, but a film that also has some problems. So see, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, when a movie like this disappoints, I just feel like it's just more underwhelming than anything. Like I don't really like take joy in like putting this film down. Like I mean, like the behind the scenes stuff is fun to talk about in a gossipy sort of way, but yeah, I feel like this was such a kind of neat premise, like a kind of dumb one, but at least one that like could have been expounded upon in a subversive and interesting way. And it just feels like they came up with the concept and they were just like, oh man, that's like too good to fail. And, they hired all these stars, they hired all these talented production people, and it just, the concept never really fleshed out to anything super dynamic or interesting, or they had too many ideas, as you're alluding to, along the way, and it just kind of got muddled and sort of thematically confusing along the way.
Right. I think it's one of those things when you're really close to a story and you know how it's going to turn out and you forget about how the audience is going to experience it. I think that's probably what happened here. So yeah, that's Don't Worry, Darling. That's all I really wanted to get into. And it's funny too, because I forgot to mention this before, but I did see some people kind of being really confused about what kind of movie this was. Like I saw one person, just being like, this is a terrible horror movie. Olivia Wilde can't direct horror. There's hardly any scares in this. And I was just like, oh, honey, like, you're not watching a horror movie. Like that's not what this is.
Well, I mean, that just kind of comes down to a general confusion about thrillers versus horror. But again,
Gen Z is still kind of figuring stuff out. That's all I'll say.
I'm not going to blame a whole generation for this. I mean, I feel like that's a confusion that comes from multiple generations. But I will say, like I said before, I think just the marketing of the movie and the conversation around the film just, similar to the film itself, ultimately got a little confusing as far as like, well, what type of film are they trying to make here? Like what type of film did they make? And, I feel like there's no straight answer. So therefore the movie itself kind of got confusing at some point or another. So I think it's understandable why some people thought this was a horror movie. Some people thought this was a period
going
drama.
In, but like while watching it, I don't know. Can't quite follow that logic, but that's just me.
One complaint I did see, and I know we're wrapping up, so I'll make this quick, that I actually thought was kind of interesting about the film was that some people were complaining like, oh, it's like there are sort of inaccuracies with the time period. Like things are more from the 30s, and then or some things are like from the 70s when it's supposed to be ostensibly like the 50s. But I thought that was an interesting touch, is that like the characters in the film would be young men who only really heard about this, or like they watched Mad Men or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's like they wouldn't have that familiarity with the time because they really didn't live in it. They just kind of heard about it from these like MAGA community.
I think it's all. Yeah, I think it's all intentional. I think it's supposed to be a clue, for the people who are a little bit more aware of the time periods and being like, oh, okay, so like this is clearly not a real place, like,
right?
Whether or not you figure out it's a simulation, which I think a lot of people will. I think a lot of people will go that route because they played games like Fallout, and this is borrowing so much from so many things.
I just wanted to bring that up because I've seen some people complain about that and say that as a criticism, but whether intentional or not, I think that actually makes the movie more interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that's something that I actually allowed the film for. I commend it because I think that makes it a little bit more dynamic, and I think it adds to the themes. I just wish the themes themselves were more coherent.
All right. Well, next week we have a lot of options for movies. I want us to do Bros. I think Bros looks like the most fun.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
Nicholas
down.
Stoller, Billy Eichner.
Yeah,
let's go.
Nicholas Stoller making a romantic comedy again after Forgetting Sarah Marshall, one of my favorite romantic comedies of the 2000s.
That's right. You know, he did the 5-year Engagement, right? But I guess that's not really like a.
Oh yeah, that was all right. Yeah.
You know, I'm a fan of The First Neighbors, and yeah. I'm happy to see him back, and Bros looks like fun. Not planning on watching Hocus Pocus 2. Got a screener, but I'd have to rewatch the first one, and I was never the biggest fan of Hocus Pocus. I know people love it, but it's just not my thing, not my bag.
Gotta be honest. I don't know if I've ever seen Hocus Pocus all the way through. I've seen scenes.
Yeah, I remember I probably same here actually, because I remember seeing it because it would always come up on like the Disney Channel. I know you didn't have cable, but like, you know, it would always pop up and I'd watch a little bit of it. You know, fun stuff, I guess. But
sure.
There's also Paramount has a film coming out called Smile, which looks just kind of like a cookie cutter, you know, horror movie where like people smile and die and stuff. I don't know. It doesn't look that interesting to me. But Rob Morgan is in it, and Jesse T. Usher is in it, and okay. And then and also Sosie Bacon. Sorry, I do like Sosie Bacon. Will Ashton, you can't see it. Will Ashton is smiling for the camera. Thank you, Will.
I have a screening for this on Wednesday, so I was planning to check it out.
I do too, but I don't know if I'm going to make it. I don't know if I care enough.
Oh well, la-di-da.
Peter Farrelly has another movie. Peter Farrelly has his follow-up to Green Book coming out, The Greatest Beer Run Ever. So that's going to be on Apple TV Plus.
You remember when that was
Zac Efron, Russell Crowe?
You remember when that was a front runner for Best Picture? Or like an attempted front runner?
Yeah. Also, Bill Murray is in it. Got to mention that too.
Oh boy,
I don't really know anything about it, but you know, it's.
I mean, what more do you need to know? It's the greatest beer run ever.
There's something hitting Netflix called Luckiest Girl Alive, and it has.
That's
I don't
coming
know
out?
anything about it, but yeah,
That's
Mila Kunis and Finn Wittrock are in it. Scoot McNairy, I know you're a fan.
Yeah, I mean, I like Scoot McNairy. I didn't realize that was coming out so soon.
And I know your favorite studio of 2022, A24, has a new film hitting limited release, God's Creatures. Emily Watson, Paul Mescal.
Oh, okay. Oh, I was confusing this with God's Country. Isn't that the one with
no.
Twandy
That
Newton?
came and went.
Yeah.
That hit, I think, in August. But no, God's Creatures, which got a little bit of buzz, you know.
Sure.
And I'm always a fan of Irish films, so let's go. There's a bunch of other stuff, but those are the main things. I know My Best Friend's Exorcism. I assume that's our number. That's our next in line.
What is that?
That has Elsie Fisher in it. You hear about that one?
No.
My Best Friend's Exorcism. Let's do it. It's about time.
I have never heard of that one. I mean, as we mentioned before, there's also Blonde hitting Netflix, which will probably spark a spicy conversation with you or whomever.
I just don't know how are we going to cover all these movies. There's also The Good House. Kevin Kline is back. Kevin Kline in a movie with Sigourney Weaver and Miranda Baccarin and Rob Delaney. We're being spoiled over here. But
oh boy, I mean, it's been so long since I've seen Kevin Kline in a film. I feel like I just saw his son obviously make a film, but not him.
Coming on up doing his thing. So anyway, that's a lot of movies. I don't know for sure. I want to cover Bros, but
I think that's the safe bet is Bros.
Yeah. But if you are a listener and you're kind of like, well, yeah, I want to hear about this, like, tell us. I mean, just, you know, let us know what are your requests, because we don't know anything. So we'll do our best to cover what we can cover. But that's it for us this week, though. You got anything else, Will Ashton, before we say goodbye to the fans?
No.
Perfect. All right. Well, from the Internet California, I'm John Negroni.
And for Pennsylvania, I'm Will Ashton.
See you next time.